Hello and welcome, star people. This is APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective. And this is another episode 153 of the Outlaw Astrology podcast. And this episode, we are discussing astrological correspondences as they relate to time in readings and tarot readings. So we understand cycles and add dimensional depth to card interpretation. Before we get on with that, this is an episode that builds on all previous Golden Dawn correspondence episodes to show you how to apply the knowledge in real readings. And we are available on socials. That would be Pinterest, Instagram and YouTube. Those links are in the show notes. There is a free and paid version of the newsletter. These episodes have a newsletter component that you can read for free if you prefer to read instead. So hop on over and have a look. Those are for anybody that wants to read, okay? Once again. And if you like what you hear and you like my astro flow, please like, subscribe and share the podcast. You can give us 5 stars so other people who are astro curious can also find us more easily and enjoy the information too and get the benefit. And thank you very much for listening. And now, onward. And now what we're going to do here is we're going to start with the major arcana, timing with that. This is decans and seasons. So each numbered minor arcana card, 2 through 10, does correspond to a specific decan in the zodiac. And it creates precise timing windows. So here's an example. 3 of Wands is the Sun in Aries, and that would be second decan, and that would be about March 31st to April 19th, and it represents mid-Aries season around the spring's emergence if you live in the northern hemisphere. It would be spring. It's fall or autumn if you live in the southern hemisphere. And so, how to interpret the timing? The card can indicate when something will happen. So, literal timing, the energetic quality of the time period or the season/cycle that you might currently be in. So, let's do another example. So, 5 of Pentacles, that'd be Mercury in Taurus, that would be the first decan. That would be late April to early May, and it's a time of material assessment in the spring's abundance. So to give you an idea, now I did cover this in a previous episode. So doing a quick search on the podcast, you can find those episodes, because they do culminate in this one. If you've arrived at this one and you have no idea what I'm talking about, it'd be best to go back to the earlier in the series, meaning the beginning, to better understand what I am talking about. So you can, back to the topic, you can use the cards as a means of anchoring, being mindful or intentional during a specific time period. So those are 2 examples of this that can be done. So one more example, let me think. 5 of Cups, which depicts a standing figure facing away toward what looks like a bridge with a water body in some cards, and there is some sort of building off in the distance. In front, to the left, will be 3 cups with spilt contents. They're turned over with their contents on the ground, and 2 cups behind, to the right, with upright. Okay, now typically that stands for grief, loss, disappointment. Those 3 cups speak of a near past experience that required grief. The 2 cups behind, to the right, slightly to the right, talk about a future potentiality. But still in the present, we are dealing with the figure facing toward the present, dealing with the grief and the loss. A 6. Alrighty, so the 5 of Cups corresponds to Mars in Scorpio. And that would take place between late October to early November. And since we're talking about it's a time of emotional assessment, emotional assessment of our motivations, what motivates us, how do we self-determine? Because Mars is about self-determinism, about self-determination, not ism, sorry, self-determination, and Mars in Scorpio is in its traditional sign of its traditional rulership, so it's looking underneath the rocks, asking the whys, how does this work, why does it work, to whom does this benefit, etc. And so what we're looking at during that season is Scorpio depth. We're looking into the deep inside, our internal ecosystem, to ask what motivates us. How do we self-determine in a world that is set up for other people to act as authors, to red pen our lives or to white light us if they feel that we're being too down or negative, which is pulling their energy down. So Mars in Scorpio is a time to look into ourselves deeply and wonder at our motivations and how we want to self-determine, not how other people might like it. And Scorpio is about depth. It's about passion. What are you passionate about? Etc. So those are 3 examples, and I'll do one more only because the Suit of Swords has not been mentioned, and so let's mention it. And let's do 8 of Swords. Alrighty, 8 of Swords. Let's have a nice little look at the 8 of Swords, which is not my favorite or least favorite. So it corresponds to Jupiter in Gemini. Now Jupiter in Gemini is not in its strength because Jupiter is the shot caller, the guide for the sign that opposes Gemini, which is Sagittarius. That's all about lived experience being the authority rather than simply knowledge. Jupiter in Gemini is curious about all of the things and inquisitive. Inquisitive meaning I want to know more, so I'm going to go out and make the effort to get the information. Curiosity is asking the question. Inquisitiveness runs down the information. So Jupiter in Gemini is learning to ask the question and then also run down the information. This is mental energy. It's abstraction. It is not interested at this point in experience, where Jupiter in Sagittarius is interested in experience. It is nice that I have this information, lovely in fact, and can I live it out? Because if I can't live it, it is an interesting thought experiment, but not entirely useful in the practical material sense of me living my life. And so that is what Jupiter in Gemini is learning. Now, when this would be most relevant, this assessment, would be during Gemini season. And that would take place at the end of May to early June. And so it is at that time that we would also look to Mercury, because this would be about assessing our relationship to info. What are we curious about? What are we inquisitive about? What lights us up? How do we communicate that? Do we communicate that? What are we thinking about? This is all Gemini energy, Gemini questions. And Jupiter is also about beliefs. So what do we believe about what we're curious about? What do we believe about what we're inquisitive about? What do we believe about communication, about knowledge gathering, information gathering? What do we believe about our ability to assess what is right for us and our choices and decision making? Because Jupiter in Gemini is expanding. It is learning that life has a mental component, and that thinking must also go along with doing. So the lived experience is the doing part, but the mental aspect is what's being developed here. And during late May, early June, we get the opportunity to meditate on these experiences. So that would be the time when you would pull out the Eight of Swords, which depicts a femme-presenting figure, usually in light-colored clothing, surrounded by swords, bound by rope, and blindfolded. Typically, this means we are in bondage in some way. Bounded is the word that I recently heard used in Jungian psychology, which is cautious, which is methodical, protective type energy. And so the card typically means that there is a belief in bondage. I am stuck, I am bonded, I can't move. And if one could take off the blindfold, which could be denial or just not seeing things clearly, one would see that the prison we think we're in is actually swords that can be pulled out the ground and we can escape. So we're not actually trapped. We have the illusion of being trapped. Consider that Gemini is a mutable air sign, and the mental realm, much like the emotional realm, is very slippery. And it needs rails, it needs safety rails. And so Jupiter and Gemini can put a toe wrong, because all this mental energy can also result in slipperiness, confusion, ambiguity, and our nervous systems are not wired to enjoy ambiguity. Interesting note, our nervous systems are wired to move fast and break things, not make good decisions. I think we all have the assumption that we're here to make good decisions. Our nervous systems are wired to be impulsive, to make very fast, quick decisions without considering the implications, because that is how we survived thousands of years ago. That is not efficient now, because doing that has consequences. And what we need to be is slow and deliberate. But Jupiter in Gemini is not slow and deliberate energy, star people. It moves fast. It breaks things. And at some point, that bill is going to come due. And that's when we move on to, say, maybe Cancer season, where the emotional fallout is available, because Cancer season will be right round the corner, and that's when we're going to have to deal with the fallout of saying what we want, thinking what we want, and etc. And believing what we want. There are always costs, and that's what we must always assess: the cost of this thought, the cost of this type of thinking, the cost of expanding in this way, the cost of coming across in this way is always going to have repercussions, and we're always going to have to mitigate cost, but we're also going to have to compare cost to effort. And that is Gemini season is a mental assessment in early spring, late spring, early summer is the essence there. So now let's move on to timing with the minor arcana. And so we're looking at zodiacal and planetary cycles. And so how do we want to orient with the major arcana cards as they connect to zodiac signs that indicate annual cycles? Okay, so that's typically how this works. Planetary cards indicate longer or shorter cycles depending on the planet, and that is the speed of the planet moving through the cosmos. So, to recap, major arcana cards connect to zodiacal signs, and those indicate annual cycles. Planetary cards indicate longer or shorter cycles, and that depends once again on the planet. So, let's talk about the timing of the thing. So, the Emperor in Aries would be equal to Aries season, which would be about March 21st to about April 19th, thereabouts. And it indicates initiating energy. These are spring beginnings. That's cardinal sign, fire activation. Now, this is only true in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, this is autumnal energy. And so we're looking at it from the spring perspective. We're talking about new beginnings. And if we're thinking about it from the autumnal experience, we're looking at what we did. What do we do? what happened already. What actions did we take, and how did it turn out? Did it work? Did it not work? What can we do to readjust? That would be the autumnal questions. Now, as a rule, if we're going to talk about next, so that's like Emperor. If we're looking at the star card, wait, let's make certain I'm doing this correctly. Yeah, the star card would be aligned with Aquarius. Aquarius would be about the 19th of January to about the 18th of February, thereabouts. And this indicates, this is a fixed sign. And the energy is less about initiating and more about sustaining the energy of Capricorn. So Capricorn, we had a goal, we moved to it. Aquarius steps back and says, is this working? How are we doing here? What's happening? It's putting on your scientist cap and putting things under microscopes or looking through telescopes. You get the point. It's the scientific part to assess whether or not we're on course or not. Are we off course? If we're off course, what do we need to do to get back on course? And so Aquarian energy is very scientific. It is cool-headed. It is supposed to be cool-headed. It is an air sign. It is not supposed to be warm and fuzzy. That's what the other signs of the zodiac, like the water signs, for example, like Cancer and Pisces, that is what they do. If you want emotional warmth, if you want like fiery, do energy, you're looking for fire signs. If you want practicality, you look for earth signs. You don't expect an Aquarius energy to be warm and fuzzy unless anything else in the chart indicates it. So that's what the Aquarius energy would be doing via the star card. And that, like I said, that would be mid to late January to mid to late February, thereabouts. About the 19th of January to the 18th of February, thereabouts. That's an assessing, using that mental energy for what it's for, which is to assess things using one's prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, okay, to be able to troubleshoot and decide, do we need to speed up, slow down, do we need to rest, should we be taking action, should we be paying attention to our bodies to see what's going on, etc. And so, major arcana timing is thematic. It is not literal. So it indicates the quality of time and what archetypal energy is active rather than exact dates. So, let me go back a tick and get back into the planetary timing. So, moving to planetary timing, let's talk about the moon card. So the moon card would be lunar cycles. That would be monthly. Emotional tides, quick moving fluctuations. The world card would equal longer cycles of 2 to 3 years thereabouts, and would be major life completions and structures. Okay? So we're looking from fast to much slower. Now, the wheel card corresponds to the planet Jupiter. And that is about cycles. So it'd be about one year, a little over a year. So cycles lasting about a year thereabouts would be a longer cycle, yearabouts. That would be a Jupiter cycle. Where am I getting this information? Okay, let me step back a tick. The moon card is moon, monthly. Okay, so what we're working with is the moon and how fast it moves. So the moon tends to change sign rather frequently, every few days. And we get new moon and full moon every month, hence month. And then we keep in mind that the moon typically means emotions, cycles, tides, quick moving fluctuations. Whereas Saturn takes about every 2 to 2.5 years, about 2 to 3 years, to go through a sign. So hence the 2 to 3 years. And major life completion and structure, that's the world card. So we're looking at the wheel of fortune. We're looking at changes in fortune, changes in cycle. We're going to have ebbs. We're going to have flowing periods and ebbing periods, and that's what the wheel notices. About a year's time, thereabouts, and it would be talking about a major cycle. It could be a cycle ending or a cycle beginning. And the cards around any of this will give you an idea of more specificity. I'm speaking generally and broadly because I am not doing spreads. I'm merely speaking about one card. And you're perfectly welcome to pick up one card for every season and say, I'm going to sit with this card and see where it takes me. Also, that's sane and also makes sense. Okay? So, now let's go back to the note about major arcana timing. Thematic is what it is. It's about the theme, not the particular time period. So the quality of the time isn't as important as we think. And we're dealing with archetypal energies being active rather than the exact date. So thereabouts, we will be using our intuition. So about 2 years, but it could be shorter than that. Just to give you an idea. So what we're looking at is the themes, how they register in our lives and in our bodies. How do we feel it? How does it dawn on our nervous system, etc. Now, let's talk about court cards and timing. So we're talking about elemental seasons and maturation. So court cards typically indicate people, personality aspects, or developmental stages rather than precise timing. So, there is a caveat, and here it is. Court cards can suggest elemental season emphasis. So, fire wands is summer and peak energy. Cups water is autumnal depth. Swords air could be winter clarity. Pentacles earth could be spring manifestation. Now, I have a note about these elemental correspondences. You are going to see them differently. Each person has their own experience of the elements and how they correspond to seasons. I have often seen wands fire as summer, so I leave it there. I've seen cups water as spring. I've seen swords air as autumn, and I've seen earth as winter. However, we're going to go with what I just said, which was wands fire is summer. That's peak energy. Cups water is autumn. Swords air is winter. And earth is spring manifestation. Okay? So, court card progression from page to knight to queen to king can indicate timing through developmental stages. Okay? As follows. Page equals beginnings and learning phases. Knights equal active pursuit phases. Queens are mastery phases. And kings are established authority phases. So, what's the difference between a mastery phase and established authority phase? Mastery phase obviously is you feel you got the gist of the thing. Okay? You are the Queen of Cups. You feel like the emotional realm is your thing. You don't feel as confused about it. You know how to navigate it in a way that's graceful. Fire, you know how to use your energy well. You know how to be a crackling fireplace and not let it get out of control so it burns down the figurative house. Swords, you know how to use that mental energy correctly. And by correctly, I mean that you don't overthink. You're not excessively impulsive, as would be a fire energy. And so you have learned how to be strategic in your thinking, but not to overthink, because you understand that nervous systems have finite energy. And at this point, the Queen of Swords now understands that exhausted feeling in her mind or her brain is telling her that her brain needs a break. That is what I mean by mastery. I don't mean arriving at some wonderful destination where you know everything and you're enlightened and never have to learn another thing. That's nonsense. It's understanding how your nervous system works, how your brain works, and your mind, and being able to respond in the moment accordingly and appropriately. That's what I mean by mastery. Now, kings are recognized authorities. They're the go-to guys. I know this stuff. And, for example, I once had an acquaintance who was a cosmetic surgeon, and what he fixed would be the orbitals around the eyes. Now, that is a specialist. You need a specialist for that. There aren't a lot of them. And so they all know each other because the field is so narrow and small. Much like podiatry and hand surgery, these are specialized fields because the complexity of the eyeball and the structure around it, much like a hand or a foot, is highly complex, and so there are very few people who actually do it. It is an authority. And so you might see the kings as the go-to guy. If you need had an accident and you need your eye fixed or your face fixed, you're going to go to a specialist who handles that specific area of the body because they have very specific training towards that. That's the go-to guy. Or let's say you're like, I don't know how to do PR properly. You're going to go find your go-to guy or gal or them so that you can have the full benefit of all of their experiences, all of their knowledge, and if they're really good at mentoring, that as well. So we're looking at kings as kind of an established authority, also a mentor, someone you can look up to and learn from, for which there is a like, trust, and respect dynamic going on. Okay? And so, to recap this part, court cards indicate people, personality traits, and their developmental stages. Now, if you're going to emphasize season-wise, fire is summer, water is autumn, air is winter, earth is spring, for the sake of this conversation. And the progression from page to king indicates timing through developmental stages. So, if you get a page card, you're like, hey, I'm learning something, and the page of swords comes up. Well, you're at the beginning of that learning curve. Or say you get the Knight of Pentacles, you're laying down the groundwork for a career. So let's say you want to be a doctor, you're going to school or you're being a resident and putting those boots on the ground so that when MD is put at the end of the name, it's because you put in the effort to do so. It wasn't magically just given to you, okay? And if we're looking at queens, okay, now you've gotten, you're respected. You're an OBGYN that others trust, and they come to you because they've heard of your reputation. That's a queen energy. And king is the go-to person, the mentor person. It's like, okay, you're a new resident, and this doc, kind of sidles up, and you're like, hey, young gun, I see you're trying to learn. Let me help you out. That's king energy, okay? Now, let's talk about practical timing examples in readings. So, this is a multi-card example, and so card 1 would be, when will I find a new job? And so, we draw, and we get the 8 of Pentacles, and that's the Sun in Virgo, that's the third decan. The second card is the Empress. That's Venus. The likely during late Virgo season, that would be about the 12th to the 22nd. And when Venus is doing well, meaning well aspected, things are going fine. And if you're looking in the charts, this could be emphasizing skill development, and it could be verdant growth. Okay, so we have these 2 lovely cards just hanging out. Okay, when will I find a job? Well, thereabouts late Virgo season, somewhere about the 18th to 12th to 22nd. And then you would check Venus in the chart, and if it's humming and like it's in Pisces, or, whatever, or if it's in Virgo, you would look and say, okay, is there any trines or any sextiles? Because all of that would say, hey, opportunities, that's a sextile. Trines, that's support. A lot of squares say, okay, there are going to be some challenges here. You'll find a job, but you're going to have to work a little harder than you want to. Oppositions also challenges. There are going to be some limitations probably outside of your control that you're going to have to deal with in the job search. But thereabouts, thematically, yes, I would not lean too heavily. It's about giving you a time period, but like I said, it's about themes rather than the exact time period. Now, moving on to reverse cards and timing. Reversals might indicate delays. So internal timing is another thing. So there's a readiness rather than external events, or the need to revisit the energy before manifestation. So typically, yes. So if we got that Empress reversed, that says that, okay, there's going to be some challenges there. And let's check out and see if Venus, at the time the card is pulled, has some squares and oppositions. Because that's going to tell us about delays. It's going to tell us about challenges we're going to encounter. And doubts and fears that we're going to have to deal with along the way. And some of that will be internal, and some of those will be external forces enacting on us. So internal timing would be how I would see a reversed card. And that means that it's time that we're going to need to revisit the energy before anything happens, meaning it needs to be reassessed. We're not ready yet. Okay, what's missing? What are we missing? Because if we're not ready, it means something's missing. We need to assess what's missing and handle that missing component before we can act. Now, we've got to address the question. Are we talking about literal timing or symbolic timing? I would suggest using intuition. Ask clarifying questions. Notice whether the person you're reading for, whether it's you or someone else, resonates with literal dates or thematic cycles. Would be the best way to handle that. So, in our initial reading, when will I find a job? And the Eight of Pentacles was drawn upright, but the Empress was drawn reversed. I've changed it because I like to do that. I'd be looking at thereabout September 12th, 22nd. I would ask, what resonates to the client if I'm doing a reading. If it's for me, I would follow my gut. I would be thinking, I'm going to go thematic because you can never, it's a nice soft deadline. I would use September 12th to the 22nd as a soft deadline, as a soft target to shoot at, but I wouldn't put too fine a point on it. And since Venus is in this, the Venus card, meaning the Empress card, is reversed, I'd be looking for squares and oppositions to Venus at that point in time when I pulled the card to see what challenges, what limitations, what I might be missing as feedback before manifestation. What needs to be revisited, what needs to be assessed, what needs to be taken care of. So, I would follow my gut as well. I would tend toward, sometimes I split the difference. I would make it a soft target, and I would keep it as thematic as I could without sacrificing either, because the target gives me something to shoot at, but keeping my eye on the theme helps me manage anxiety much better. And it makes me feel less stuck. Okay? And so, moving on to the next thing, we want to talk about the timing. And the thing about timing is that it's fluid and multivalent. And a card might indicate 3 months, 3 of any suit. Spring, that's spring, which would be earth energy. So it would be depending on the card we draw. So we're looking at 3 months could be 3 of any suit. Spring could be earth energy, or when we've learned the lesson would be developmental timing. And so that could be, let's say I pull a third card, and it is the Queen of Pentacles. Learning how to manage my resources well. So, I would see that as completion energy, okay? And if I'm seeing Queen, when you've learned this lesson, that's Queen energy. You've learned the lessons you need to learn. That's what we talk about. Also another way of seeing mastery, okay? Since we've got an 8 of Pentacles up above, that could be 8 weeks or 8 months, depending on the question. And it's Pentacle energy. So when you've got it down, when we've reached completion, and completion is determined by gut instinct only, when it feels right to us, when it feels right to you, to me, to whoever we're reading for, whether it be us or anybody else, it's when we feel it's complete, no matter what it looks like to anybody else, okay? And so I think we are wrapping up right now. Yes, we are. So the key takeaway here is this. Astrological correspondences can transform tarot from snapshot guidance into something more multi-dimensional, and it can be great timing tools. So you can use decans for precision, signs for seasons, planets for cycles, and intuition for integration. And so here is what we can do now. Pull a card and ask, what energy is most present in my life right now? And then look up the astrological correspondences. Now, there are 2 places. There's Biddy Tarot has a great page that sometimes I reference, and they have a section on their website. It's called Delving into Tarot and Astrology in the Golden Dawn Tradition. You can put that into the search engine and you'll come to Biddy Tarot. Not an affiliate link. I just find this information useful. It's so easily written. It's so easy to read and to understand. It's just perfectly done for if you're an intermediate and you're trying to learn tarot and astrology and timing techniques. So that would be one resource I would point us all towards. I use it and I think it's a good resource. So what you want to do is look up that astrological correspondence and notice that if the timing resonates with our current experience or points toward the upcoming cycle or not. And so the next episode is moving beyond Golden Dawn and creating our astrological correspondences. That means now we're going to be doing it for ourselves, creating our own personalized system that we can use that most resonates with us. And so thank you very much, stargazers, for listening in, and peace and astro magic until next time.